So yesterday we saw some beautiful Agadata about Hespedim, about what was said at the death of a righteous person, and of these different rabbis. And the last one that we saw yesterday we saw some beautiful Agadata about Hespedim, about what was said at the death of a righteous person, and of these different rabbis. Okay, so. The last thing we saw was that when Rabbi Simon Bar Zvid passed away, Rabbi Laya came and gave a hesped for him and said that, precious metals can be lost from the world and they can always retrieve them. But when a Talmud Chacham passes away, it says, "V'hachachma me'ayin timatzeh, ve'ezeh makom bina," that where are you going to find wisdom from? Once it's lost, you can never retrieve it. And another, additional hesped that was said over the same rabbi is Amar Rebbe Levi. Rebbe Levi said the following: Ma'im ache Yosef al shamatzu mitzia yatsa libam. He says, when Yosef's brothers, when they found the money in their bags, their hearts despaired. And so what are we talking about? We know they go down to Egypt. Yosef treats them harshly. But then when they bring provisions back, he says, you've got to leave one of your brothers here. And they go back. And then when they get back to Canaan, they discover that the money that they had expended was put back in their bags. So this was, so Yatza Libam, their hearts left them. They despaired. Why did they despair? Because they thought that this was a pretense to try and incriminate them, right? That they were being set up for incrimination. Mm-hmm. So they realized that this was going to be a problem. Not only did they have to go back to Egypt in order to retrieve their brother Shimon, but they were going to have to bring the money back with them and say that, we didn't take this. As it says that their hearts departed from them. Anu sha'avadnu es Rabbi Simon Bar Zavid al achas kama v'kama. So he says, now that we've lost Rabbi Simon, so how much more so should we be in pain? Now the question is, what's the analogy? Mm-hmm. The analogy is if you lose something, you should despair. Why would you want to compare Rabbi Simon's passing to getting the money back? So I didn't really have a chance to think that much about it, but I noticed that in the commentary, he suggests that Rabbi Simon's passing was at a time where perhaps there could be other Talmidei Chachamim who might have been able to take his place. And the problem is that these Talmidei Chachamim were not a viable replacement for Rabbi Simon. In other words, even though people thought that maybe, he's replaceable, but sometimes even when you get something as a replacement, you get upset because you know that it doesn't belong. So in other words, that might be the reason why he was given that kind of hesped. Now we have another hesped, Kademach Rabbi Levi.
Back to the statement we made at the beginning about how when a Talmud Chacham is lost, we've lost it. Can't recover it
it's a replaceable loss.
Don't we also say that when we learn the Torah of our Talmud, then it's like they're with us and they come alive? So is that not recovering what was lost to some extent by?
Not really, no, because when a Talmud Chacham leaves, he doesn't have the chance to refresh and augment whatever Torah he had already provided. All you have is the opportunity. It's like basically saying, if I have a video of a great rabbi who passed away, it's like he never passed away, right? Well, to a certain extent, yeah, you have the videos, you have his shiurim on tape and so forth, but you still don't have his presence. You don't have the ability to interact with him. You don't have the ability.
Yeah. No, I hear.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Kademach Rabbi Levi Bar Sisi al ovoye de Shmuel va'after iloye. So when Rabbi Levi himself passed away, he's known as Rabbi Levi Bar Sisi. But let me just point out that Rabbi Levi was the premier student of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. So when he passed away, So Shmuel's father came and said the hesped for him. Um, and many times in the Bavli, Shmuel's father is known as Shmuel's father. And it seems to be, and I don't remember the whole story, but because Shmuel was such a prominent Rosh Hashiva and a great Gadol Hador, his father was always known as Shmuel's father. In other words, sometimes you get, you become known as so-and-so's father. So anyway, but he himself was a great Talmud Chacham. And he comes and he gives the hesped for Rebbe Levi. Sof davar hakol nishma es Elokim yira. And we know the pasuk that this is the penultimate pasuk of the book of Koheles, that at the end of all, after everything has been heard, es Elokim yira ve'es mitzvosav shemor ki zeh kol ha'adam, that fear God and observe his commandments, because that is the totality of man. So how can we apply this to Rebbe Levi? Lama haya Levi ben Sisi doimeh. What was he like, this Levi ben Sisi? L'melech shahaya lo kerem v'haya bo me'a gifanim. A king once had a vineyard, and the vineyard had 100 vines. V'hayu osas kol shana v'shana me'a chavuyos shel yayin. Every year, that vineyard would produce 100 barrels of wine. V'amad al chamishim gifanim. But unfortunately, one year, the vines were diseased or whatever happened, and he was only left with 50 vines. But nonetheless, by some stroke of good luck, even the 50 vines were able to produce the same yield of 100 barrels of wine. The Amad al Arboim, and then the next year, there were only 40 vines left. I guess another 10 died or withered. And but still, the yield was still 100 barrels of wine. Amad al Shloshim and then the following year, it went down to 30 vines, but it still was, by some stroke of good luck, was able to produce the same yield of 100 barrels. Amad al Esrim then it went down the next year to 20, still produced 100 barrels. And Amad al Eser then it went down to 10, and by some miracle, it was still able to produce the 100 barrels. Amad al Echad, and then it went down to just one vine. But lo and behold, that one vine was able to produce 100 barrels of wine. And that one vine was so precious to the king, it was as if he had an entire vineyard of 100 vines. And similarly, Rabbi Levi Bar Sisi was beloved to Hashem, like all of humanity, like everybody. Hadahu dichsiv kizeh kol ha'adam. So, and that's what the pasuk is referring to. Sof davar hakol nishma, that at the end of all, when everything is heard, meaning this is a pasuk referring to Rebbe Levi, who's the last. Now, what I want to point out is, and the commentary doesn't say this, but I'm going to say this. Rebbe Levi was on the cusp. He was at the very end of the period of the Tanoim. We know that Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi was the last of the Tanoim. So his student was the bridge generation between the Tanoim and the Amoraim. And there was a recognition, even during that period, that we've lost something invaluable. And Levi, who was the premier student of Rebbe, represents the vestige, that final vestige of that previous generation of Tanoim. And so, because Levi represents the last vestige, so he's sof davar, at the end of all, meaning at the end of that generation. Hakol nishma, whenever we heard everything from Levi, and he taught us, as Elokim yira, fear God, ves mitzvosav shemor, and observe his mitzvos. That's what we had heard from him, and that's what he represented for us. Kizeh kol ha'adam, because that guy, Levi, he represented the entire generation. Kol ha'adam. That's what he represented for us. Kizeh kol ha'adam. Okay. So that to me is the meaning of this Gemara, and why Levi's death was able to get that kind of special mention. Okay,
I mean, just in terms of like the scenarios and stuff, was it the same like we did, like it was immediate? And how would people like in Bavel know to come over, because Shul, was that not Bavel? You were talking about the other name here.
Avua de Shmuel, yeah, well,
How
it
would
could
they
be.
know if
It
you-
could be he happened to be in town that day. He was visiting Mishpacha. We don't know. We don't know what the
The
circumstances
same
were.
concept, like immediate and very, it was always, so
Yeah.
nobody could come, like until the information got out.
Yeah, it would have been unusual for people to wait. But, who knows what circumstances there were in this case. Or maybe Levi was in a coma the last few days of his life and
Right.
knew that he was going to die. Yeah.
We're coming.
Yeah, who knows? Okay. Anyway,
That was a long haul from Bavel to Yerushalmi. It's strong.
it depended where in Buffalo you were. You could have been at the border. Okay. Anyway, so let's go to the following story about Rav Kahana. But before we get to the story of Rav Kahana, we should point out that Rav Kahana was originally from Bavel, and he seems like he got himself in trouble with the government, and so he made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. He may have said something that was perceived to be somewhat seditious, so he goes and makes Aliyah, and he comes to Rav Yochanan's. This is all recorded in the Bavli. He came to Rav Yochanan's Beis Medrash and was a brilliant scholar. So as Rav Yochanan was giving shir, Rav Kahana would constantly ask him kashas. And at some point, he stumped the great Rav Yochanan. Now, Rav Yochanan was very hard of sight. The Gemara describes that he had eyelids that were very droopy. So he used to keep his eyes closed. And only once in a while would he lift up his eyelids. It seems like he had to do it manually to lift up his eyelids in order to see what was going on. And he notices Rav Kahana, and he looks Rav Kahana after he stumps because he wants to see who's this young whippersnapper who's asking me all these questions. And it seemed to him like Rav Kahana was smiling, like gloating that I've stumped Rabbi Yochanan. But in reality, Rav Kahana was not smiling. He had a split, what is it called? A cleft palate.
Mm-hmm.
He had a cleft lip, and it looked like he was smiling when he wasn't. So Rabbi Yochanan didn't realize that, and he cast a very scornful gaze upon Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana died instantly. When Rabbi Yochanan found out about it, he went to his corpse, prayed for him, and he was resurrected. So you've heard that story before, right? So now that we know the background of Rav Kahana, he's now living in Eretz Yisrael. And now let's see what the aftermath of that story is. Kahana hava uleim sagin katsalik lahacha. Rav Kahana was quite a young man when he made Aliyah from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Hamsei chad bar pachin. So there was one guy who was a very low character, not a very like he was a bulvan, what we would say in Yiddish, like a boor. Okay, Va'amar lei, and he said to him in a scoffing way, "Yeah, we heard that you died and you came back. So ma kala bishmaya." He says, "What did you hear in Shamayim when you were up there? Like when they told you to come to the light. Like what did you see? Tell us about your experiences." And Rav Kahana got insulted, and Amar lei gazardine dahu gavra michtam. He said, "I heard that your decree was sealed that you're going to die." That's what they told me.
You're next.
Yeah, that you're next. So v'kein habas leumis. And actually, because Rav Kahana pronounced it and he was such a tzaddik, it actually happened that shortly thereafter the guy passed away. Then Pagabe Chamse Chad Charan, another boor that saw Rav Kahana and Amar lei ma kala bishmaya. He also asked them the same question. What did you hear in Shamayim? Now, it could be, it doesn't say that this guy was a Bilial, that he was a Bulvan. It just says another person. So it could be that this person may have been actually curious and was asking in a very respectful way. But because Rav Kahana had this experience with this other guy, hey, what'd you see when you died? Right? And and then this guy conjoined to that experience. Could be Rav Kahana overreacted over here. So Amar Lei Gizardine Dehu Gavra Michtem V'chein Havale. So he said the same thing. Yeah, you know what I heard? I heard that they decreed that you're going to die. And so actually, that's actually what happened. And he actually passed away.
Yeah, for what you ask and when you ask it.
Yeah. So Rav Kahana now all of a sudden realizes, you know what?
What's it doing?
What am I doing? Like maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I've made, maybe I shouldn't be here. So Omar Mas Lekis Mizke, he says, why did I come up to Eretz Yisrael in order to become a greater Torah scholar? I made Aliyah to learn the Torah of Eretz Yisrael. Va'ana echte, and yet look what I'm doing. I'm sinning. I'm causing people to die. Is that why I came here? Mas Lekis, so Lemiktale b'nei Arad Yisrael, did I only come here to kill Jews of Eretz Yisrael? Nazel v'nechos li min ha'adis. Maybe I should go back to the place where I came from. Maybe I need to go back to Bavel. This is not good what I'm doing here. But he didn't want to go back to Bavel without getting permission from Rabbi Yochanan. So Asa Lagabe Rabbi Yochanan va'amar le. So he comes to Rabbi Yochanan, and he doesn't want to ask him outright, do you give me permission to go back to Bavel? But he asked him in a remez, in using a metaphor. He says, Barnosh de ime mevasrele, ve'itase de avuhe mokarale. Let's say a man has parents who are divorced, and they live in two different cities. The mother, every time he visits his mother, she insults him, and she puts him down. But his father has gotten remarried, and his stepmother is very respectful to him, and she gives him lots of kavod. So he said, Lahan Yezole, where should that person go? Should he go stay with his mother and bear her insults? Or should he go to his father where he'll be treated very nicely? That was his question. So Amar Le, Yezel Lahan Demokrin. So Rabbi Yochanan said he should go to the place where he gets proper respect. Why subject yourself to all of that abuse? Okay? So Nechas Le Kahana min hadisalak. So Rav Kahana went back to Bavel from the place where he had left. And of course, what he was alluding to is Eretz Yisrael is my mama. But when I go to Eretz Yisrael, all I get is, I get Don Rickles when I go to Eretz Yisrael. Everyone's got a comment. Everyone's got something to say to me. And wherever I go, people don't acknowledge me, and they just know that I got killed by Rabbi Yochanan and he had to bring me back to life. And that's what I'm famous for, okay? But if I go back to Bavel, that's not how people know me. People give me respect as a genuine scholar. So he says, Asun Amrin Leila Rabbi Yochanan, Hanachis Kahana LeBavel. So they told Rabbi Yochanan, Rav Kahana, he left, he moved back to Bavel. So Amar Mahava Mezele de la Mesa Vershusa. He says, how could he have gone back to Bavel without asking me permission? If he could depart, wouldn't that be the respectful thing? So Amrin Lei, Hahi Milsa de Amar Lach, he have an Atilas Rishus Didei. He says, that question, that Shiloh that he asked you about the mother and the stepmother, that was his way of asking you permission. Rabbi Yochanan didn't realize it at the time, but now that they pointed it out to him, he understood that he was the one who gave him permission to go back to Bavel. Okay, let us go on. The Gemara now brings another story.
But who was his Rebbe Rav Kahana? Do we have any history on him? Why he was so sharp?
I'm sure there was. I'm sure we could find it. I don't know offhand.
Is there a sefer that has a list of all of these?
Yeah.
There's
There's a sefer called Shem HaGedolim. Yeah, I think it's by is it Reb Chaim Vital? I don't remember who wrote it, but Shem HaGedolim. See, yeah, I think it's by one of the great Talmidim of the Arizal, I think.
So the second is excuse that we can't leave, we live in Israel, we can't leave without permission nowadays?
No, it's the case over there. Was a student. He was a student in Rabbi Yochanan's yeshiva. And when you're a student in someone's yeshiva, you can't just pack up overnight and say, I'm out of here without asking permission to leave. The Rosh Yeshiva allowed you to come in. You have to take your leave. That's the respectful thing to do. It's not dependent upon being in Eretz Yisrael. But it's also important. I mean, your question is an important one. Once you make Aliyah, what legitimate right do you have to leave? That's a separate question. It's not really pertinent to our discussion here in this story, but it's a valid issue, which is once you've made Aliyah, you don't have a legitimate right to leave unless there are issues that prevent you from being able to thrive in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Kahana perceived, listen, I'm not going to be able to, I'm killing people while I'm here, like that's a legitimate reason to leave Eretz Yisrael. Like I'm not myself. I'm not the productive person. I don't like who I am when I came to Eretz Yisrael. I know that there are people who have tried to who made Aliyah and made a go of it, and they had to come back because there were, they suffered from very serious emotional or mental issues when they tried to make Aliyah.
Or Parnassa.
There's Parnassa for sure is a legitimate reason to not stay, but there could be any number of reasons why, if you feel completely dysregulated and not yourself, you need a sedative, when you're in Israel, right? So there are people that are like that just can't function in different environments. For me, Israel is my happy place. When I go there, I'm very happy. But there are people who don't function that way. It's the language, it's the culture, and it's very hard for them. So
Most Israeli.
Do most people today hold those, like for a visit, you come out, visit, it's okay, because I've heard that some people, once they go there, they will not leave.
well, they say about the Lubavitcher Rebbe that the reason why they say, I don't know what the truth is, but they say about him that the reason why he never went to Eretz Yisrael is because he felt that once he went, he would never be able to leave. But
Is that what you felt?
it seems from the Gemara and Ksuvas that once you go up, you can't leave. But if a person went with the initial intent, I'm going there for a certain amount of time, and then I have to come back, I have affairs that I have to deal with here. So then you do have a legitimate right to travel back and forth. And that's the prevailing halachic position, right? So, and people in Eretz Yisrael hold the same thing too, that you can justify leaving Eretz Yisrael, even if you live there, and as long as you're going to come back. So people who leave with Chutz La'aretz with the intent of coming back to Chutz La'aretz are allowed to visit Israel, especially because they're doing mitzvot when they're in Israel. Okay.
Yeah, but just going back to Rav Kahana, when he goes back, Babel, why wouldn't there be any bull buns there also? Like he'll kill people there too.
There were, but they didn't know about what happened to him, that he died and he saw the
Well, I
light.
didn't know.
Yeah, they probably didn't know. I mean, it wasn't like, I don't know, maybe people would have known, but it wasn't when that's not what his signature issue when he was in Eretz Yisrael was that, hey, this is the bacher that Rabbi Yochanan killed and brought back to life. Yeah, and this is
He was more anonymous than Babel.
yeah, right. In Bavel, he was known as the great Rav, the young Rav Kahana, and so he felt that he would be able to thrive more there. And maybe there were cultural issues. Maybe, like, to me, I read this Gemara as saying, like, there were cultural divides between Eretz Yisrael and Bavel, just like there are today between, North America and Eretz Yisrael. And sometimes the way people speak to you in Israel can knock you out of sorts,
You think? Yeah.
unless you have the right attitude, When I go to Israel, I know I'm the foreigner, I'm the greener, and This is a family member of mine who's given me a knock upside the head just to knock some sense into me. Yeah. And it requires a certain humility, and it requires a certain attitude of I love my people. Yeah, suck it up, right? Okay. And there's a lot of beauty in Eretz Yisrael among the people, like you feel like everyone's ready to embrace you at the same time that they're yelling at you, right? Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You just gotta deal with it.
Yeah.
Like the sabra metaphor, right? The prickles. And
Yeah.
inside.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Where are we? Okay. Rebbe Ze'ira Katsolak Lahacha. When Rebbe Ze'ira came to Eretz Yisrael, Azal Akizdam, he went to get a bloodletting because that was considered therapeutic in the times of the Gemara in the ancient world, probably up until maybe the 20th century. People would regularly do bloodlettings as a therapeutic
Is that
measure.
everywhere in the world? Not just there.
Everywhere in the world,
It was just
everywhere.
there was a thing.
It was considered to be therapeutic. Who knows?
Instead of partying, they just, let's go.
It could be that in 5 years from now, they'll discover that bloodletting is helpful. Maybe it helps alleviate blood pressure. Who knows? Who knows what they'll discover? So the whole and so people would typically eat protein and meat when you got a bloodletting, because even in the ancient world, they realized that you have to replenish your blood, and you do so by eating meat. Okay. Azal bo'i mizbon chadalitra de kopad min tabacha. So he went to go buy a piece of meat from the butcher. So he went to buy a litra, which is a certain weight, like a pound of meat. So Amar lei bekama hadin litrasa. So he asked the butcher, how much is this pound of meat? Amar lei bechamshin moneh v'chad korsam. He says it's for 50 moneh and a lash with this whip. So that's a strange answer, right? What a strange thing for him to say. So Amar lei savli shitin velo kabil iluye. So the Rebbe Zeira said to him, I'll give you 60 instead of 50, but I don't want you to whip me. So velo kabil iluye. But the butcher did not agree. And Rebbe Zeira continued, and he says, Savloch Shavin, I'll give you 70. Just, I don't want to get whipped. Velo kabil iluye, but the butcher said no. Savloch Shmonim, Savloch Tishim, Adamati Meya. So he says, I'll give you 80, I'll give you 90. Each time the butcher refused, he says, no, it's 50 and a whip. So finally, Reb Zeir got to 100. V'lo kabil iluye, and still the butcher refused. So Amar lei, so Rebbe Zeira said to him, Avid kemin hagach. So then, all right, do whatever is your minhag, which is, here's 50 and give me a whip. And berumsha nechis lebeis vada. So when Rebbe Zeira went to the base medrash, Amar lon Rabbanan ma bish minhag dahacha. So he turns. No, this is in Eretz Yisrael, and he turns to. He's a new immigrant to Eretz Yisrael. And he discovers that in order to buy meat, you get his zets from the butcher. So he says, like, what the heck is going on here? So he turns to the other rabbis and he says, Ma bish minhag dahacha. What kind of minhag? What terrible minhag they have here? The la'achil barnash litra dekupa ademachu leichad korsam. That you can't buy a piece of meat here until they give you a lash from a whip. So Amrin lei umahu dain. So they said to him, what are you talking about? We never heard of such a minhag that the butcher whips you before he'll sell you a piece of meat. Amar lon plan tabacha. So he said, oh no, it's this butcher. So you want to hear what happens? Come back tomorrow. We'll tell you the rest of the story.
Look back here.
Same bad time, same bad.
They call
Cliffhanger.
Yeah, cliffhanger, yeah. Yeah, anyway, Wayne, make sure when you go to the butcher today, if he asks you for a whip, tell him, what are you talking about?
I'll ask him if he's ever heard of such a thing.
Okay, we'll finish the
If
story.
he says yes, I'll run very fast.